You may proceed.
May it please the court, defense counsel, Mr. Summers, co-counsel. Good morning, good morning, gentlemen. Between March 11th of 2017 and March 13th of 2017, Elisa Summers thought she was living out the last few days of her life. She believed that the defendant, Trevor Summers, was going to kill her. And he didn't attempt one time to kill her during those days. He attempted twice. I'm going to take you back to October 16th, October of 2016, when Elisa Summers decided that she was going to seek a divorce against the defendant. She moved out of the home, got her own home, was working, purchased a car, and was moving on with her life. She was moving away from the marriage that she had been in for the last 16 years with the defendant. And they had 5 children together. The oldest, Arden Summers, being 14 years of age, and the youngest, Cooper, who was 3 years old. Elisa Summers, during that time between October and March, she obtained a restraining order, specifically in February of 2017, just 2.5 weeks before the March incidents occurred. She obtained a restraining order, a protective order, where the defendant knew he was not to be near Elisa Summers or her home. But on March 11th of 2017, he ignored that protective order. And he proceeded to utilize his 12-year-old and 14-year-old's feelings about the divorce. They're typical teenagers who were upset that their parents were going to get divorced, that their family was going to change. And he played on their feelings with that, and he convinced them to help him get into her home in the early morning hours of March 11th of 2017. The Friday before, March 10th of 2017, Arden Summers, the 14-year-old, and Brennan Grady, 5 and 7 years old, were spending the night with Elisa Summers. And the plan was, once Elisa and Brennan Grady went to sleep, Arden was going to help her father get into the home so that he could come and talk to Elisa and try to convince her to come back home so their family could be a family once again. There's text messaging that you're going to get to see that occurred between Landon, who was 12, Arden, who was 14, and the defendant, that occurred on the evening of March 10th of 2017 with this plan. Questions: are they sleeping yet? Is mom's boyfriend at the house or not? So Landon and the defendant, once 3-year-old Cooper fell asleep around midnight leading into March 11th of 2017, Landon and the defendant left the home while Cooper was left at the defendant's home sleeping. Landon and the defendant proceeded to drive to the area where Elisa Summers lived and parked in a parking lot just down the street from her home. Surveillance footage captures Landon walking down the street towards his mother's home. Surveillance video footage captures the defendant walking down the street, walking towards Elisa Summers' home, that he knew he was not supposed to be there. Shortly thereafter, you see Arden and Landon walking away from the victim's home. You don't see Trevor Summers walk away from the victim's home. The state submits that the evidence will show Trevor Summers entered the bedroom window that Arden had left open for him. He proceeds to enter Elisa Summers' home while she is sleeping in her bedroom with her 5-year-old and 7-year-old, Brennan Grady. And you will see the text messaging that continues between Arden and Landon and their father, the defendant, about what he's doing in the home of Elisa Summers. and how he is going to try to wake her up and convince her to come back home. But that's not what happened. You are going to get to hear from Elisa Summers. You are going to hear what happened in that home the early morning hours of March 11th of 2017. You're going to hear that she woke up to some person she could not see in her dark bedroom. She begins screaming, "Who is here? Who is in my room?" And as soon as she hears the defendant's voice, she knows exactly who it was. She starts throwing things at him and screaming. Bryn and Grady are in the bed with her. The defendant takes her feet, pulls her out of the bedroom and down the hallway into the family room. Bryn and Grady are waking up, seeing what's happening. They realize what's happening. They're concerned for their mom. They're crying and upset. And the defendant tells Bryn and Grady to go back in the bedroom. For hours then, the defendant has the victim in her family room. Elisa tries multiple times to run out the front door, and every time the defendant overpowers her with his weight and size. She is trying to keep Bryn and Grady calm. So every time they yell from the bedroom, "Mom, are you okay? Is everything okay?" She's like, "I'm fine, kids. Everything's okay." Because she's worried about them. Around 4:20 a.m., you're going to see the defendant's Pacifica minivan come driving by from the parking lot was down the street towards Elisa Summers' home. Arden and Landon are sitting in the minivan from the early morning hours around 12:30 until 4:20 when the minivan is being seen moving towards the victim's home. They're texting their father, and he's texting them back. He's saying, "I need more time with her. I need more time." At some point, shortly before 6 a.m., he tells Arden that he needs more time. She needs to come in and get the kids because someone needs to get home to Cooper because he's going to wake up soon, 3-year-old, at his house. So you'll see video footage where 14-year-old Arden drives from her mother's home, leaves around 6 a.m., and is pulling into her father's home at around 6:18 a.m. It's about a 25-minute drive. 14-year-old Arden drives his minivan with Landon in there and Bryn and Grady in that vehicle. The children remain at his home that day. There's some text messaging. They're asking, "When are you and Mom coming home?" All the while, the defendant has Elisa Summers tied up in her home, in her bedroom, where he is talking about he's going to leave. He needs to leave. He's going to catch a boat to go to an island. She is hogtied at points. She is tied with Christmas tree lights, tied down to her bed with rope. He would come into the room, leave, and come back. When she would be able to wriggle out at times, he would tie her down with more ropes. You will hear from Elisa Summers. She will take you step by step what happened those hours on March 11th of 2017 in her bedroom. The defendant wanted to get into her phone, her cell phone. She's hogtied, and he's trying to get her thumbprint on the phone to unlock it. He would leave the room. She did not know what he was doing, if he left the house, if he just left the room and went into the family room. She didn't know where he was because she was in her bedroom this entire time. At some point, he walks into the bedroom with a look she has never seen, has never recognized this look. And in his eyes, he approached her when she is tied onto the bed, grabs a pillow, and puts it over her face. He is standing over the bed, takes the pillow, and pushes it down on her face when her hands are tied. She then feels him get onto the bed and force his whole weight, pushing that pillow down on her face as she is struggling to breathe, struggling to find a way to take a breath. To the point he pushes so hard and for so long, she loses consciousness. She comes to, and she just feels the pillow laying over her face at that time. She didn't feel any more pressure. And she realizes at that time she can no longer continue to fight. She's not going to be able to run. She is going to have to do anything and everything to act like she is on his side. She's going to have to change her tune. She's going to have to, what she says is, I will go with you. I will go with you on that boat. Because she knows if she doesn't, her life is over. So at that point, she makes the decision that she tells him he's going to go. And he's like, oh, you're going to go with me? She says, yes, I'll go with you. He packs her bag, he packs her suitcase, and the plan was that they were going to go by his home, say goodbye to the children, get his suitcase, and then they would go for this boat that he said he had down south, lined up to take them to the islands. During these hours that Elisa was held in that house, he doesn't let her go outside. He lets her have some smoke breaks where you'll see in photographs outside a window the cigarette butts are thrown out there. He allows her to take a shower. He watches her in the shower. There are sexual acts that occurred during this entire March 11th through the 13th. There are 4 sexual acts that occurred. 2 in Hillsborough. 2 in Manatee. But the facts and circumstances surrounding those sex acts will show to you that it's anything but consensual. At some point in the evening of March 11th of 2017, roughly around 8:30, the defendant finally responds to his children. I've convinced her she's coming home. We're coming home. I'll be there soon. That's the last text message that the children get. So shortly before 9 p.m., even though Miss Elisa Summers had agreed that she was going to go with him, he had to tie her up. He had to tie her up to get in the car, to get in her car. He didn't have a car there because the children had already taken it to his house. So he takes her keys to her vehicle, puts her in the car, tied up with her hands behind her back, with a blanket draped over her so no neighbors would see, and puts her in the passenger side of the vehicle. He then drives the both of them towards his home, and they stop at a Walgreens. He parks at that Walgreens, enters the Walgreens while Elisa Summers is left in that passenger vehicle. She is able to maneuver her hands that are tied behind her back to open up the passenger door. She jumps out of the car yelling and screaming for help as the blanket falls off the back of her. You will hear that a Walgreens employee, Mr. Crosby, saw this happen. Based upon what he saw, he called 911. He saw the defendant come running out of Walgreens, grab Miss Elisa Summers, and put her back into the passenger side of the vehicle, get in the driver's side, and flee the Walgreens. But before the defendant was able to leave, Mr. Crosby got the tag number. And that is what exploded this entire investigation by the Hillsborough County State Sheriff's Office open. That 911 call. From that point, Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, from March 11th through March 13th, is conducting an active kidnapping investigation. You will hear the number of deputies and detectives and sergeants that were on this case. They had a mobile command station where all the leads, all the tips, all the investigative work that was being done by the sheriff's office was coming back to. They were trying to find Elisa Summers alive. After the Walgreens incident, the defendant was not very happy because now he was not going to get to go say goodbye to the children. He wasn't going to be able to get his suitcase. He takes Elisa Summers a ways down the road, out of the car, gets mad at her, ties her then to the seat with the rope, and proceeds to drive around in her vehicle for quite some time, heading south. They proceed down to Manatee County, where they remain in a secluded area in a field underneath a tree in order to not be located by law enforcement for the night of March 11th of 2017. The defendant had taken her out of the vehicle at one point and said he was going to cut her, the ropes that were tied behind, had her hands tied behind her back. But by accident, he cut her wrist. You're going to see the injury to Miss Summers' wrist. You're going to see the blood that was left behind from that. But he didn't cut those ropes off. She was still bound with her hands behind her back as she was bleeding on March 11th of 2017. She had already tried to run at that point at the Walgreens. She was not successful. So in this secluded area, she wasn't able to run. Miss Summers will tell you what the defendant told her if she tried to run. That night, on March 11th of 2017, they stayed in that vehicle. The defendant, he took a nap. Miss Summers, she didn't sleep. All next day, March 12th of 2017, that vehicle and them remained in Manatee County, laying low to not be discovered by law enforcement. Finally, on March 13th of 2017, they were running out of food and water. So those early morning hours, they go to McDonald's and Citgo. You will see video footage from them at those two places. You will hear what is going on and where Elisa Summers is when the defendant goes into Citgo. He makes her be in the third row of the vehicle so he doesn't have another incident like what happened at the Walgreens. You'll see how his behavior is in that Citgo video. Shortly thereafter, they proceed to Anna Maria Island, where he is telling her, we need to look for a certain color flag. That's where this safe house is going to be for this boat that you have agreed to go on with me. They drive around. They're not able to find the color of the flag that he told her, but he knows where this other safe house is going to be in Little Harbor, the Ruskin area. And when they're over in the Little Harbor area, they're continuing to talk, and he's like, you're really going to go with me? And she says, well, I would really rather stay here with the children. She's going to test the waters. Can she maybe convince him? She tells him, I promise, if you let me stay with the children, I will not call the police. I promise you I will not call the police. So he starts considering letting that happen. Or so he tells her. He writes letters in the back of the victim's vehicle, letters that you will get to see, a confession letter of what took place on March 11th, 2017 at her home, writes a surrender of his parental rights, writes letters that Miss Summers is to get his car, the money in his bank account, and his home, and a letter that he wrote to his children. A letter that he wrote before the second attempted homicide incident. You will get to see that letter. You will get to make the determination what kind of letter that was. At some point when they are in the Ruskin Little Harbor area, Elisa Summers makes a comment when the defendant says that he's going to write a letter to his parents. And she makes a comment, why would you do that when they are partly involved? Because she had no idea that her 14-year-old drove herself and her 3 siblings home the early morning hours of March 11th. The defendant had told her that his parents had picked the children up. And at that point, the defendant gets mad that Elisa Summers makes that comment. He takes the rope that she was tied up with and proceeds to pull it around her neck. Elisa Summers, while her hands are tied, she's able to stop it as he is trying to pull that rope and strangle her around her neck. The second attempted first-degree murder charge. You're going to get to see shortly thereafter what Elisa Summers' neck looked like. You're going to get to make the determination what was happening in the vehicle at that time. While the defendant has this rope around Elisa Summers' neck, he notices what he thinks is an undercover marked unit. He jumps into the front seat and begins to drive a ways down the road to a home that is on stilts and pulls in underneath their carport. He tells Elisa, we've been spotted, that law enforcement's going to be here soon. He then takes a razor blade, the razor blade that he had cut her wrists with on March 11th of 2017, and says, I'm going to lay my life down for you. And he begins to cut his neck as law enforcement surround the vehicle, pull Elisa Summers alive from that vehicle, pull the defendant from the vehicle, place him down on the ground, and detain him while they provide aid to his neck. Elisa Summers is in shock, is grateful that she has been found. She has just been through Lord only knows what. She provides an interview with law enforcement. She is photographed. Items are taken from her. Swabs are taken from her. She is taken to the crisis center where a sexual assault exam, a sex bat kit, a rape kit is performed on her. She shows law enforcement where pieces of evidence were disposed of by the defendant. The state would submit to you that that is all evidence that corroborates what Elisa Summers is going to tell you on the witness stand. The defendant is taken to Tampa General Hospital, where he receives treatment for his self-inflicted wound. And at that hospital, he is read his Miranda rights, and he admits to some of the incidents that occurred between March 11th and March 13th. You will get to hear that recording and the admissions that the defendant makes on that recording. The admissions like he allowed Arden to let him in to Elisa Summers' home the early morning hours of March 11th of 2017. The admission that he was trying to suffocate Elisa Summers with a pillow. She was mouthing off, and I told her I could end this right now. Well, I was just being an ass and, pretending like I could suffocate her. Question, but she is tied up at this point? Yeah, she's tied up. His admission that he walked into Walgreens and when he saw her running around in the parking lot, he had to go grab her and put her back in the car. And he thought that a Walgreens employee saw him and was probably calling 911. You'll hear him admit to the writings that he made in the car. The writings, the confession letter, the writings to his children. You'll hear him admit that he knew he lied to Elisa Summers about who drove the children home because he knew Elisa Summers would freak out that her 14-year-old daughter drove her and her siblings home. But what he told law enforcement was he didn't do this. He wasn't mad because she was on dating websites or moving on with her life. That's not why he did this. He did it because he was mad she didn't tell him the truth about it. Ladies and gentlemen, the law that you are to follow in this case is going to come from Your Honor. It's not going to come from me. It's not going to come from defense counsel. So at the conclusion of this case, the law you are to follow is the law in which the judge is going to instruct you. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. The evidence will come from the testimony from that witness stand right there, the exhibits that are introduced in this trial, and the state is confident that at the conclusion of this case, you will find the defendant guilty as to all charges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Marchese, does the defense wish to give an opening statement this time?